The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 195.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have David Grant, author of The Social Profit Handbook, the essential guide to setting goals, assessing outcomes, and achieving success for mission-driven organizations. Welcome, David, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thank you, Wade.
Before we take a deep dive into your book, The Social Profit Handbook, will you take just a moment to introduce yourself? Tell us just a little bit about you personally.
Sure. I have had a career split between two fields. The first half was in education. I was an English teacher, and then I had the opportunity to found a school in Vermont called the Mountain School, which was the first of a whole series of semester programs that now exist around the country. And then I became president of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation in New Jersey. So actually, that's a good introduction to my book because I'm really combining the two worlds. I came into the world of philanthropy and nonprofit management and leadership with the perspective of a teacher.
Well, fantastic, David, and thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into your book, The Social Profit Handbook, the essential guide to setting goals, assessing outcomes, and achieving success for mission-driven organizations, which was made available not that long ago, as of recording, actually, technically yesterday, but March 16th, 2015. And Dave, we're going to move quickly, but our whole goal here today is to help the future our listener today, but our future reader get a great idea of what your book's all about. And so we're going to go through a series of questions that'll help us do that. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing the Social Profit Handbook?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that when I came into the foundation world, I was doing it with a teacher's sort of a leaning toward the question, who needs to learn what here? And so I ended up working very closely with the executive directors and the board chairs of the nonprofit organizations that the Dodge Foundation funded. And so what started with a couple of afternoon sessions became a full-blown course in leadership. And the real incentive to write the book was that after these workshops, time and again, people said, you have to write a book. So I paid attention my last 6, 7, 8 years on the job at Dodge about how things were connecting, how the ideas were connecting. And then when I left that job, I went about writing the book.
Fantastic. And so this question is one of the most important, I believe, because entrepreneurs are so inundated with books. And that's what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic.
Well, if we look at the topic narrowly, which is to say, if we look at it as a book about assessment and measurement, and that's what I'm trying to get at really with the Social Profit Handbook is, how do you measure that? I think the book is quite different in that it's written by somebody who actually doesn't care that much about the science of measurement. I have great respect for people who do, but I'm much more interested in the whole idea of assessment as a tool than I am as an end in itself. And so I think that what people would be surprised to find is that the book is written in a practitioner's voice. My whole interest is not in measurement, but in what is being measured. And that is to say, in this case, social profit. I say the world is quite full of people who are chasing financial profit, and the world arguably needs more social profit. And we have a whole sector that does that, which is the nonprofit sector, the social sector. But we also have an increasing number of mission-oriented businesses and even businesses that aren't officially incorporated as B Corp or the like know that to have social benefits as well as goods and services is good for them in the long run. So basically, any mission-driven organization needs to be able to talk about what success looks like and to be able to answer when people say, how do you measure that? So that's what the book's about.
Excellent. And David, how do you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this a book they can jump in and jump out, grabbing information as needed? Or did you really write it to be read from front to back?
I did. I wrote it to be read from front to back because I actually build an argument, and that's in itself a challenge these days because people have so little time to stick with a thought. But nevertheless, I did, and it's still, I think, quite manageable and readable. The text part of it is only about 150, 155 pages, but I think it would be hard to sort of jump into chapter 6 or 7. I think you need to start with the introduction and work your way through.
Excellent. So, David, we're to my favorite part of the entire interview. You've given us the purpose, you've given us the background behind the book, and now I want to take a deep dive into the content itself. So we take the next 5 to 8 minutes and really give the listener and future reader a great idea of what they can expect to get out of your book.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you for the opportunity. I spend the introduction and chapter 1 really trying to say, well, is this worth your time? And I think that what I'm trying to do is to let people know that this is a book about questions of assessment, but I've got a bigger purpose in mind, and that is that social profit that the world needs, and that so many are inherent in the missions of the organizations. So I try to grab their attention. I tell some stories. I use some poetry. I'm trying to indicate to them that if they were expecting a dry book, this isn't it. And then if I have their attention, I move on to the idea that, the 3 chapters, 2, 3, and 4, which are about mindsets. They're about assumptions. And I say that I think if we start thinking differently about assessment and have different practices, that we will not only create more social profit, which is to say meet our missions more, but I think we'll actually be happier in our workplace. And I say you can't jump right to it, though. You can't jump right to the assessment tools because there are some things that hold us back. And so chapter 2, 3, and 4 are about those things. Chapter 2 is about measurement itself. And I say something that when I do this in a reading or in a workshop, people are nodding furiously. It's that we live in an age of metrics, and we live in an age of outcomes measurement, and people are constantly asking for numbers. But we know that not everything yields itself to numbers. And so how is it that people can gain the confidence to use assessment in a different way, qualitative instead of quantitative, and for a different purpose, which is to say formative? When I say formative, I try to avoid all jargon in this book, but formative assessment is simply assessment whose purpose is improving the work, as opposed to summative assessment, which is about judging work. Formative assessment comes before the work even happens. Summative assessment is when the work is over. We are very geared to summative assessment because we all went to school. And if you just think about how many hundreds, even thousands of times we've been judged on our performance after it's over, we might be forgiven for having assessment be one of those words that our stomach sort of roils when we hear it. So I suggest that in the chapter on measurement that that we should open ourselves up a bit to quantitative measure. I quote Michael Fullen, the professor at University of Toronto, that he says statistics are a wonderful servant, but an appalling master. And I suggest about that if we don't have a standard measure for something, we actually have to create it, and that if we start to take the tack that the things that matter most to us need qualitative assessment tools created by us, the people who create the social profit and the people who for whom it's intended, then the whole ballgame shifts. The next chapter is about assessment itself, and I go on at some length about this whole question of how words like feedback have been co-opted. If I meet you in the hallway and say, "Oh, Wade, I'm glad I bumped into you. I've been meaning to give you a little feedback," your reaction is probably, how do I get out of here? Because feedback has become code word for criticism. I talk about creating a feedback system where if you hadn't bumped into me in the hallway, you'd be looking for me because you knew I had valuable information for you. Chapter 4 is called Mission Time. And it's a key idea in the book. And this is based on my 12 years of running the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, where I time and again talked to leaders in the social sector. And some of them were running small operations, some were running big, but none of them took enough time with colleagues to reflect on how they were doing and to get feedback in time to use it, and to get feedback against measures that they had created. So I simply, I make the case for mission time and building it in to an organization and thereby really changing the culture of the place. All of that leads me up to chapter 5, which is the central chapter of the book, and it's called The Art of the Rubric. The rubric is a qualitative assessment tool. It's everywhere in education, hardly anywhere in the social sector. And it's very simple in form. It's a matrix where down one side you've got criteria for success, and along the other side you've got levels of performance in relation to those criteria. It's infinitely expandable, and it gives you time to use words as well as numbers to describe what success looks like at these different levels, and including higher than right now you can even imagine. Rubrics should be aspirational. So that my chapter on the art of the rubric is really a little mini part of a workshop that I've given for years about how to think about rubrics and how to design them. And by the time people are at the end of chapter 5, I'm hoping they are just fired up to start working with their colleagues on writing some rubrics. Therefore, chapter 6 is practical advice on rubric design. And I shift from teacher to coach in this chapter because I know the problems they're going to bump into, and I know some of the brick walls they're going to face, and I try to suggest ways to get around them. Then chapters 7, 8, and 9, and these would be the chapters if you just jumped into from the beginning, you'd wonder where you were, are examples of organizations that have gotten together, sat around a table, and used rubrics to create qualitative assessment tools that has changed their work. And I start with individual organizations that are kind of small, and by the time I'm in chapter 9, I'm describing entire systems where people all over the country have come together to write rubrics on such topics as sustainability, food justice, and the like. The last chapter, chapter 10, is called Changing Our Minds and Cultures. And it asks what gets in the way of this work. And it says something that is implicit in the entire book, which is that you can have the best ideas in the world, but you can't actually bring them to life unless you create an atmosphere in the workplace where people can come together with startling clarity about what it is they do, what they don't do, what they value, and what success would look like. And then the very end, I have an afterword, which tells a story that, for me, talks about the higher purpose of the book. And then an appendix that I hope that would particularly interest you, Wade, because it's called The Foot-Long Bookshelf. And I say, for anybody in an organization, a mission-driven organization, if you just had a foot of bookshelf and you knew that whatever you put on it would be instantly understood, thoroughly, deeply understood by everybody associated with your organization, what would you put on the shelf? And I give my suggestions.
That's a fantastic way of putting it. You know, we're going to ask you for a book recommendation later in the interview, but that is we try and keep the interview short, so we only ask for one. However, I never mind when they give me when an author gives me more than one recommendation. But foot-long bookshelf. And, that's something to think about too. You know, I own a sales organization, and instead of 500 different books, what foot-long bookshelf full of books would I, based on what you just said, if it was just instantly understood. And it really is. Sometimes it is. I mean, there probably is 6 fundamental books that if they understood this right now, that, it'd be a game changer.
I love it because, it's an exercise in prioritization. And there are indeed some ideas that are so seminal that others just flow from them. And so, anyway, I had a lot of fun with it. And I've set up a website where I urge other people to give me their suggestions as well as send me their rubrics. So that we can share them. This whole venture is educational in nature, but it's about improving work.
Yeah, that is fantastic, David. You did an amazing job of taking us through your book. And this next question is going to break it down even a step further. And we're going to ask that if the reader can only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, everything you just took the time to discuss with us, what would you as the author want that to be?
Well, I think my phrase would be the power of rubric writing in mission time. And you see, I've cheated slightly because those are two ideas that need each other, which is to say the rubric writing is, if you do it, you've accepted the responsibility, you've taken assessment into your own hands instead of waiting for external forces to assess your work. And what I'm saying is you simply can't do it unless you create the time to do it. I call it mission time. There are other names for it, but we are so busy these days that we're constantly responding to the urgent, and nothing could be more important than this sort of collegial conversation and subtle conversation about what success is. And so I say you have to designate the time, you have to name it, claim it, protect it. So I would say rubric writing in mission time.
There were some quote-worthy things you just said, and that leads into our final question about the book anyway, and that's, do you have a favorite quote from your book, and will you take a second to explain what it means to you?
I would say, I don't know how long I have here, Wade, but in chapters 7, 8, and 9, I quote the practitioners who wrote the rubrics. And I just love, there was the executive director of an organization called Green Faith, which is a faith-based environmental organization, gave a quote at the end of the chapter about the rubric. And he said, the first value of the rubric was that it pushed us to think more clearly and more deeply about what we were trying to accomplish. This turned out to be an exercise in vision development that was joyful for us. I don't mean to sound sappy, but it really was meaningful and fun. For the rubric to do its job, it needed to be a living part of our reality. We needed to talk about it, to tweak it, to critique it, to celebrate it. It needed to stay integrated as a part of the living mental landscape of our work. That's only part of his quote. He's actually an Episcopal priest, and you can tell he's probably gives some good sermons. But that deep feeling about the work and the effect that it had on him and his colleagues and all the people he works with, I think is it doesn't get much better than that for me.
No, that's fantastic. And for people to be able to dwell on that a little bit further, we'll put that in the show notes at the elpodcast.com. We have so many, David, the people that are mobile right now listening to this that we love to put it in there so they can go back and reflect on that.
Great.
But Dave, now we're going to do again, I guess, our version of the foot-long bookshelf. But this is, again, I always talk to authors about, we're not looking for a recommendation. We're looking for the recommendation. So if there's only one book you could recommend to our listeners based on the way that's impacted your life, created a huge paradigm shift or a lifestyle shift, what book would you recommend? And I do want to say, because sometimes it does not have to be on business or anything like that. Just whatever book comes to mind.
Well, you just threw me off because I was thinking about business, and then you just gave me permission to go back to all of literature. I spent 25 years as a teacher of literature.
Oh, wow.
So
this will be the best recommendation ever.
No. I'm going to I'm going to stay in literature for a minute, and I'm going to say that the book that just came into my mind right there when I thought about that huge field was the book All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. Robert Penn Warren is a poet, as you know, but he wrote several novels. This is the most poetic, most beautifully written novel I've ever found. I found as a man to read this book about whose narrator, who's searching for a father, some confusion over who his father was, and in the end is able to accept his own history. He's able to accept responsibility for his actions, which he could never do before. I found it a profoundly moving book, and I've thought about it almost every year since I first read it when I was 16 years old.
Well, that's fantastic, and thank you for that recommendation. We haven't had that one suggested on the podcast just yet. And David, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also on your book, The Social Profit Handbook?
Yes. I created a website for the book, and it's just www.socialprofithandbook.com. So it should be easy to remember, socialprofithandbook.com. There are links to some reviews of the book. There's what I hope will be a growing number of recommendations for the footlong bookshelf and some examples of rubrics. There's a bio of me and actually a link to about 25 essays I wrote on the blog of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation about various social issues. So I would say that's the best single source.
Perfect. David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Wade, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you'd like more information on David or his book, The Social Profit Handbook, check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.